What if I told you those headlines you're scrolling past right now? All the international tension, the conflicts, the crazy stuff happening around one tiny nation in the Middle East. What if someone sketched all that out thousands of years ago? And I don't mean in some vague Nostradamus-style riddle, but in pretty startling detail. So are we just watching history do its thing, or is there something more predetermined going on? That tiny nation, of course, is Israel. And look, whether you're big into history, searching for spiritual answers, or just trying to figure out what on earth is going on, Israel's story is one you just can't ignore. For thousands of years, ancient prophecies have laid out a pretty dramatic and often chaotic future for the Jewish people in their homeland. These aren't just some dusty old books. People say they've influenced huge global events, shaped empires, and many believe they're still playing out right now. So in this video, we're going to really get into it. We'll uncover some of the most eye-opening parts of Israel's biblical destiny. We'll look at what these ancient texts actually say, try to trace their path through history, and then get to the truly mind-bending bit, how these prophecies might be unfolding, literally right in front of us. Now, this isn't about scaring anyone or making wild predictions. It's about exploring a story that's fascinated and puzzled people for ages. A story that suggests Israel's journey is nowhere near done and is actually a key piece of a much bigger picture. Get ready, because what you think about history, current events, and maybe even the future could get a serious shakeup. It all kicks off with a promise, a really, really old one. We're talking almost 4,000 years ago with a man named Abraham. In the book of Genesis, the Bible spells it out. God promises Abraham and his descendants a specific piece of land, Canaan, later known as Israel, as an everlasting possession. Now, this wasn't just some casual, hey, here's some land for you. It was a divine deal, a sacred contract, really, that became a cornerstone of Jewish identity and faith, echoing down through every single generation. Just let that sink in for a second. Everlasting possession. That's a huge claim, especially when you think about that region's history. It's been a highway for empires, conquered and reconquered more times than you can count. Egyptians, Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, Byzantines, Crusaders, Ottomans. Honestly, the list just goes on and on. For centuries, during the exile and dispersion known as the diaspora, Jewish people were scattered all over the world. They faced awful persecution, pressures to assimilate, and the constant fear of their culture just vanishing. But somehow that link to the land, to Zion, never died. It lived on in prayers, in rituals, in this unshakable hope that one day they'd return. Okay, let's jump to the 20th century. After almost 2,000 years without a state of their own, something incredible happens. Something many biblical scholars and prophecy watchers see as a massive prophetic moment. The state of Israel is reborn on May 14, 1948. People often point to the prophet Ezekiel's dry bones vision in chapter 37, which talks about the scattered people of Israel being brought back to their land and revived as a nation. It's all about a physical comeback, a national renewal. Many don't just see this as some random political event. They see it as the super sign that the prophetic clock for other big end times events started ticking. But this return wasn't, and still isn't, easy. There's been intense conflict and controversy. The land itself, it's still one of the most fought over pieces of dirt on the planet. And this too is something a lot of folks see lining up with those prophetic stories. The prophecies didn't just talk about a return, they also mentioned the struggles that would follow and how the land would become this major focus of global attention and tension. Just think about Jerusalem, a city holy to three major world religions, and it's always in the news. Prophecies in books like Zechariah talk about Jerusalem becoming a cup of trembling and a heavy stone for all nations. Pretty intense, right? So the first really startling thing about Israel's biblical destiny is this almost supernatural connection to one specific spot on the map. A promise made thousands of years ago, then being scattered, and then a regathering that, let's be honest, beat all historical odds. And the unfolding now bit? Well, the fact that this land is still so central in world affairs, the ongoing arguments, and the deep spiritual meaning it has for millions, it all suggests this part of the prophecy is still being written. Some analysts even think Israel just being there and its control over Jerusalem are must-haves before other end times prophecies can happen, like the much talked about rebuilding of a third temple. So if the promise of the land is one pillar of Israel's biblical destiny, then the journey of its people is another. And it's just as dramatic. The prophecies didn't just draw a map to a homeland. They also talked about a pretty wild ride for the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We're talking about times of huge blessings, but also times of terrible judgment, being scattered far and wide, and, this is key, eventually being brought back together. Take the prophet Jeremiah. He talked about a time when God would scatter Israel among the nations, but also that, in the latter days, he'd bring them back. Jeremiah 16:15 says, "For I will restore them to their own land, which I gave to their fathers." Often this prophecy mentions that this regathering would happen through fishermen and hunters. Some folks think these are metaphors for both good efforts to bring Jews back to Israel and, sadly, times of persecution that would force them to return. And if you look at Jewish history, it's full of forced moves and violent expulsions. From the Babylonian exile way back in the 6th century BCE to the Romans destroying the Second Temple in 70 CE, which really kicked off the long diaspora. For almost 2,000 years, Jewish communities lived as minorities in other countries. They often faced discrimination, violent attacks called pogroms, and even attempts to wipe them out completely, with the horrors of the Holocaust being the most extreme. And yet, through all of that, they held on to their unique identity, their religious practices, and that burning hope of one day returning. This toughness, this resilience, is something many see as proof of a divine hand, keeping them safe for a special purpose. Then, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the modern Zionist movement started up, a political and social effort to create a Jewish homeland again. This movement really picked up steam, tragically, as anti-Semitism got worse in Europe. When the State of Israel was established in 1948, it was the result of all these efforts. But it also kicked off a new wave of people coming home. Jewish people came from Europe, from Arab lands where their families had lived for centuries, from Ethiopia, from the old Soviet Union. Many see this as fulfilling prophecies like Isaiah 11:12, which talks about God gathering the outcasts of Israel and the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. What's so incredible here is just how unlikely it all was. Historians have a hard time finding anything like it. A people keeping their identity strong for so long without their own country, scattered across so many different cultures, and then rebuilding their nation in their original homeland, even bringing an ancient language back to life. As Yael Eckstein from the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews pointed out, historically, there's never been a people, a nation that was in exile for 2,000 years and then reunited with their home, reignited this biblical language that they spoke. So how's this playing out now? Well, the regathering is still happening, just in different ways. Israel is still a place where Jewish immigrants go. But maybe even more importantly, the prophecies also talk about an internal change, a spiritual awakening for the nation. Some readings suggest that coming back together physically is just the first step before spiritual restoration, a national turning to God and recognizing the Messiah, like it says in Zechariah 12:10 and Romans 11:26. The spiritual side of things is a huge part of Israel's predicted destiny, and many believe it's mostly still to come, but that the stage is definitely being set. Okay, this is where things get really wild. Beyond the land and its people, Israel's biblical destiny apparently puts it smack in the middle of some major end times drama. We're talking huge global conflicts, the appearance of powerful, sneaky leaders, a time of chaos like we've never seen, and then, ultimately, some kind of divine intervention that completely changes the world. One of the most talked about prophetic scenarios is the war described in Ezekiel 38 and 39. These chapters talk about a massive group of nations. Prophecy scholars often point to countries like modern-day Iran, Persia, Russia, Magog or Rosh, Turkey, and others, launching a surprise attack on Israel after it's been regathered and seems to be living securely. The reason for this invasion? Plunder and destruction, plain and simple. What's happening right now with global politics and tensions in the Middle East, especially with Iran and its allies, has a lot of prophecy watchers saying, hey, this looks like it could be leading up to that very conflict. While most scholars think the actual fulfillment is still down the road, recent flare-ups are definitely making some people feel like the stage is being set. For example, those reports from June 2025 about Israeli actions against Iranian nuclear sites and the drone attacks in response, stuff like that really ramps up the anticipation for many. Then there's this figure often called the Antichrist. Prophecies in the book of Daniel, like Daniel 9:27, in the New Testament talk about a very charismatic world leader who shows up, at first bringing what looks like peace. This leader is predicted to make a 7-year deal or treaty, and many think it will be with Israel. This peace is supposed to be so convincing that Israel might even let its guard down, like some readings of Ezekiel 38 suggest. But then, halfway through those 7 years, this leader is expected to break the deal, do something terrible in a rebuilt Jewish temple, the abomination of desolation mentioned in Daniel and Matthew 24, and kick off a period of intense persecution against Israel and believers around the world. This is known as the Great Tribulation or the time of Jacob's trouble. Some folks who study this stuff think that with all the instability in the world today and how ready people might be for a strong leader to offer solutions, the conditions could be forming for someone like this to appear. Through all these prophecies, there's this repeated idea of Israel becoming more and more isolated on the world stage. The Bible predicts Israel would face increasing hostility from other nations, along with a big spike in anti-Semitism in the last days. A lot of observers look at current international politics and the disturbing rise in anti-Semitic incidents globally and see it as this prophetic trend playing out. But the story doesn't just end with destruction. A really crucial part of Israel's shocking destiny is a predicted national spiritual awakening. At the peak of all this end-time trouble, scriptures like Zechariah 12:10 say that a remnant of Israel will look upon him whom they have pierced and recognize Jesus as the Messiah. Romans 11:26 echoes this, saying, and so all Israel will be saved. This spiritual comeback is described as a deep, nationwide turn to God, leading to their ultimate salvation and fresh start. And finally, the grand finale of this whole prophetic story is the return of the Messiah. Prophecies in Isaiah, Zechariah, and Revelation describe Jesus Christ coming back to earth, defeating Israel's enemies, including that Antichrist figure in the armies gathered at Armageddon, and setting up his 1,000-year kingdom based in Jerusalem. In this new era, Israel is predicted to be honored among the nations, and the world will see peace and righteousness like never before. The unfolding now part of these end-time prophecies, that's probably the most debated and closely watched bit. Many interpreters see what's happening today: specific military conflicts, new international alliances, the push for Middle East peace deals that sound a lot like that prophesied covenant, and even new technologies, as all pieces of a prophetic puzzle clicking into place. The feeling among many prophecy watchers is that we're living in a time when the stage is being very clearly set for these ancient predictions to actually happen. So what makes Israel's biblical destiny so genuinely shocking? It's just the massive scale of it all, the incredibly specific details, and the almost eerie way these ancient writings seem to connect with actual historical events and what's happening right now. It's this idea that a tiny nation, which has been on the verge of being wiped out so many times, doesn't just survive, but ends up playing a central part in a divine story that stretches across thousands of years. Think about it. From that solid promise of a particular land to the unbelievable story of a people scattered and then brought back together, to its predicted spot right in the middle of future worldwide chaos and eventual salvation. It's a story like no other. Whether you see these prophecies as literal maps of the future, symbolic tales, or just really interesting historical and religious writings, you can't deny their lasting power to shape what people believe and how they see world events. The very idea that these ancient texts laid out such a dramatic and detailed future, and that we could be watching it continue to unfold is, let's face it, pretty mind-blowing. So we've walked through some really deep and thought-provoking prophecies about Israel, its land, its people, and what these texts say is its ultimate destiny. It's a story of promises made long ago, history playing out against all odds, and a future that, if you go by these scriptures, is still very much unfolding. That rebirth of Israel in 1948, many see it as a super sign that kicked a prophetic timeline back into gear. And what's happening today, from conflicts in the region to big shifts in global politics, is always being looked at through this prophetic lens, with lots of people thinking these aren't just random events, but pieces of a much bigger divine plan. The main takeaway here is that Israel's biblical destiny, as it's written, isn't just some old story from the past. It's presented as a live, ongoing drama that affects the whole world. And that brings up a pretty big question for all of us. If these ancient words have, as so many believe, been spot on about so much of Israel's past and present, what does that tell us about what might still be coming? And how does that change how we see the world today? What do you think about all this? Do you see these prophecies playing out in what's going on in the world? Drop a comment below. I genuinely love to hear what you think. This is a complicated and often sensitive subject, so let's keep the discussion respectful. If you found this whole exploration interesting, do me a favor and give this video a thumbs up. And definitely subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out when we explore more fascinating topics like this one. Thanks for hanging out and watching, and remember, keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep thinking.